In a town where everyone laughs, a young man takes on a rusted tank, madness or the rise of a hidden hero. A small town lay quietly under the shadow of gray clouds. The only movement along the roadside came from the wind rattling rusty signs and the distant crowing of roosters. On the outskirts of this forgotten place stood an abandoned garage, a corner where time seemed to have paused. Its walls were darkened by dampness, its roof missing a few tiles, and its interior filled with the scent of dust and metal. Inside this garage, a young man named Ethan was working to turn his greatest dream into reality. At 19, he was slated to build, his hands stained with oil and rust. Determination burned in his eyes, though a trace of weariness lined his face. Before him lay the pieces of a rusted military tank, massive wheels, broken tracks, and a tangled mess of an engine. This tank, long ignored by the town, was a heap of junk to most. But to Ethan, it symbolized hope. Ethan arrived at the garage with the first light of dawn. He opened an old toolbox, pulling out rusty wrenches and screwdrivers left to him by his father. With every move, it was as if he could hear his father's voice. "Patience, my son. Everything comes with patience." But this patience had become the subject of ridicule among the townsfolk. Throughout the day, passers-by would stop and laugh. Hussein Amcha, the local grocer, would pause with his bags and say, "Ethan, are you really going to fix that tank? Don't make me laugh, boy." The young men with him would chime in with chuckles. Even the town's mayor, old Ali Daya, had once shuffled to the garage and muttered, "This kid's gone mad. Who'd want that junk?" It was another such day. Ethan had the tank's engine cover open, carefully inspecting the web of wires inside. His hands trembled, for the magnitude of the task sometimes frightened him. But quitting was not an option. The medallion his father had left him rested like a cold weight in his pocket. The etched soldier figure on it gave Ethan courage. Just then, shadows appeared at the garage door. A group of town youths holding soda cans peered in with mocking grins. "Hey, Ethan, are you going to fly that tank or burn it?" one shouted. The others burst into laughter as Ethan lifted his head to look at them. There was no smile on his face, only a deep resolve. "You'll see one day," he whispered to himself, his voice echoing off the garage walls before fading. Does Ethan's tank dream rise from his father's shadow? Will this legacy save him? The nights Ethan spent in the garage were not just about working with the tank's parts. They were a journey, carrying the weight of his past. That night, as exhaustion closed his eyes, his mind drifted into a flashback. Years ago, the days spent with his father came flooding back. His father, a retired soldier, had instilled a love for mechanics in young Ethan. Back then, an old military camp on the outskirts of town had been their sanctuary. The camp's surroundings resembled a smoky battlefield. Rusted bullets, broken weapons, and abandoned tanks littered the ground. With a medallion in hand, his father would tell Ethan about the soul of tanks. "This machine," he'd say, "is not just metal. It's a soldier's courage." Recalling those days, Ethan's heart ached. His father would wake him every morning, press a wrench into his hand, and say, "Come on, son, let's learn something." Little Ethan would run after him, disassembling and reassembling tank engines. But what he remembered most was when his father took the medallion from his neck and gave it to him. "This is my courage," his father had said. "One day, you'll find yours." That medallion now sat like a treasure in Ethan's pocket, but his father's loss, from a sudden illness when Ethan was 12, had plunged him into silence for years. Ethan's hands are worn, but will the tank's engine signal hope? Could victory rise from this silence? Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's struggle in the garage settled into a rhythm. He arrived with the first light of dawn and worked on the tank's parts until midnight. His hands grew calloused, his fingers coated with oil and rust, but the fire in his eyes never dimmed. The tank's engine was like a puzzle. Wires tangled, bolts rusted, every piece presented a new challenge. Ethan often clutched his father's medallion in his palm, drawing strength from it. The garage's dim light danced on the tank's metal hull, blending Ethan's mind between past and present. "Father, will what you taught me be enough?" he'd whisper at times, met only by the wind's howl as a response. One morning, Ethan awoke with a different energy. The previous night, he'd solved a piece of the engine, and now he was ready for the final step. He opened his toolbox, grabbed a rusty wrench, and dove into the motor's depths. His heart raced. This was the moment he'd waited months for. He connected the wires, checked the fuel line, and took a deep breath. "Now," he said to himself, "it either works or it's all over." He turned the key, and for a moment, there was silence. Then the engine rumbled. First a slight tremor, then a loud roar. The tank's motor had come to life. A smile broke across Ethan's face, his eyes gleaming. At the garage door, the town youths stood in stunned silence. "This is impossible," one shouted, but Ethan didn't hear. The sound of victory filled his ears. As the flood swallows the town, will Ethan's tank become a beacon of hope? Will heroism be born in this moment? One night, an unexpected disaster struck the town. The sky darkened and rain poured like a deluge. The river overflowed, homes were submerged, and the townsfolk waited helplessly for aid. Ethan, inspecting the tank's motor in the garage, noticed the commotion outside. He rushed to the door and couldn't believe his eyes. The streets had turned into a lake. People climbed onto rooftops, their cries echoing through the air. An idea struck Ethan. The tank could stop this catastrophe. He hurried back, slipped the medallion around his neck, and took control of the tank. The motor still ran, but this time he'd use it for the town. He drove the tank into the waters, its tracks clogging with mud as Ethan's hands slipped on the wheel from sweat. His first rescue was an elderly woman and her grandchild. He pulled them into the tank and brought them to a safe hill. The townsfolk watched in astonishment. "This boy's a hero," one whispered. Ethan didn't stop. He saved a family stranded on a roof, then a group of children. The rain showed no mercy, but the tank's red headlights cut through the darkness. Finally, he built a barrier by the river, diverted the waters, and saved the town. The crowd erupted in applause as Ethan stepped down from the tank, weary but wearing a proud smile. Ethan's tank saved the town. Will this garage now become a school where hidden heroes are born? After the disaster, the town slowly began to recover. The waters receded, homes were being rebuilt, but a change had settled in the people's eyes. Ethan, with his heroism that night, was now seen in a new light. The garage was no longer a forgotten corner. People gathered at its door, offering thanks and even help. Ethan stood by the tank, gazing at the medallion around his neck. This medallion, his father's legacy, had become a symbol of hope for the town. As days passed, boards were nailed around the garage, old tools were cleaned, and a workshop took shape. Ethan wanted to turn this place into a training center, teaching young people mechanics and uncovering the hidden heroes within them. One morning, a crowd gathered in front of the garage. Children, youths, even the elderly stood, with tools in hand, waiting. Ethan opened the door and smiled. "This is now the Hidden Heroes Workshop," he announced loudly. The first lesson began with the tank's maintenance. Ethan opened the engine, showed the parts, and assigned tasks to everyone. A little girl smiled excitedly as she held a screwdriver. A young man oiled the tracks. The garage's dim light danced with watercolor-like hues as laughter and tool sounds filled the air. Ethan, with the medallion around his neck, moved among the youths, encouraging each one. "There's a hero in everyone," he said, waiting to be unleashed. Weeks passed, and the workshop became the town's new hub. The tank stood like a monument in the garage's center, inspiring visitors. Ethan would smile at his father's photo at night. "I did this for you, Father," he whispered. The town was changing under Ethan's leadership. Prejudices gave way to hope. One day, a child ran to Ethan and handed him a copy of the medallion. "I made this for you," he said. Ethan's eyes welled up. This was the continuation of his legacy. Above the garage door, the Hidden Heroes Workshop sign glowed, a beacon of hope in dark blue tones. Subscribe now. Follow for more.